The web and the so-called Web 2.0 makes it possible for us to have access to information everywhere we go. Also, this information is free and continual. It's everywhere nowadays, even a lot on social media. For example, think about your Facebook or Instagram feed. But why is this free information so important?
For example, when Martin Luther came along, it wasn't just that he nailed some theses to the door, it was that he came along about the same time as Gutenberg, who could give everybody a Bible. And suddenly the Bible was not something that was strictly interpreted by the church, ex cathedra. The Bible was something that anybody could read and figure out for himself. And that fundamentally changed the power of the church and changed the power of all social organization in Europe. And we just think, the human mind has its limitations, but we just think that humans are more likely to achieve their ultimate purpose, whatever that may be, if they have the capacity to completely explore the possibility space of what can be known. And I have a mystical belief in this, and EFF does as well. We want people to have, I'm pro-choice, but you can't make a choice unless you have all good choices are informed. Now, I would grant, I can imagine there are people who listen to me say that and say, well, yeah, what about the new reality distortion fields that spin themselves up in the rumor mill of the internet, where you've got, like people who are going around claiming that Obama's a Muslim, or that he wasn't born in America, or, any number of silly things that get spread around. And that happens. But I ultimately think that in a completely open information environment, the truth will out.
At its core, it feels as if the ownership of ideas is part of what you're fighting about.
Well, see, that's and this is the real. See, you can't own free speech. And I saw this very early. This was actually not an EFF issue. It was something that I identified. I wrote a piece for Wired magazine in '93, which called The Economy of Ideas. And I recognized that the only reason that copyright had worked was because it was hard to make a book. And that suddenly anything that a human being could do with his or her mind would be infinitely reproducible at zero cost and infinitely distributable. And given that there is a fundamental quality in human nature that likes to share information, if you think something is cool or interesting, what's the first thing you want to do with it? Mm-hmm. Tell everybody you like. And if it's not just simply saying, I read this great book, you should go out and buy it, but you can just sort of zap the book right into the other person's mind, practically, you're going to do that. And you're not going to have much regard for copyright. And so the powers that had been suddenly saw copyright as being a splendid way to control this scary new liberty. That exerting powerful controls on owned word would be the real method of clamping down on this thing. So that I knew was going to be where the push really finally came to shove. And they had a pretty good run there, at least legally and legislatively. They managed to win every place where there was an established power. But where they didn't win was where it really counted, which is they were trying to set up technical obstacles to the free flow of information, usually involving cryptography or something like that. And you got a bunch of, 55-year-old greedheads that are up against, 17-year-old electronic Hezbollah that they have seriously pissed off by their previous depredations on that community. So, I mean, who's going to win that one? You know.
We just cut the one side. It's nice. So we roll again?
Yeah.
But, I mean, we are trying to pound 20 years of important history
Yeah.
into, 5 minutes or whatever.
Yes.
It ends up
I'd love to get onto gift economies, but I won't.
Yeah, well, I mean,
We could do that later.
I mean, that's a fundamental. That's a fundamental part of it.
Absolutely.
I mean, I remember, when I was first touting the internet. This is in 1990. Nobody even knows what it is, and the few people who did know said, "Well, you're never going to be able to have any business going on then. There's no commerce." And I said, "Well, I don't know. Millions of keystrokes get entered into that thing every day. Now, I don't think people do anything unless they're getting something back. That looks like an economy to me. It may not be monetized, but it is an economy, I promise you."
As Mr. Barlow said, you can't own free speech, but some countries or governments think they can own free speech, and some also succeed in this. The consequence is often censorship, but more and more often we can see that countries or governments fail with this censorship because of the power and freedom of the web.
There's a famous quote that says, "The net interprets censorship as damage and routes around it." And when John Gilmore said that, he actually wasn't being metaphorical. He was literally describing the communication protocols of the internet. So if you're trying to get a message from point A to point B on the internet, it's sort of like driving from place A to place B. You got a network of roads. There's multiple ways that you could drive. But one of the roads could be damaged, closed. Maybe there's an accident, I don't know, maybe there's a problem. And so as a driver, you find another way to get there. You find a different road. The internet works the same kind of way. It has these routing tables that determine how things move. And if you can't go from A to B through path 1, it finds path 2. Well, censorship is a kind of a blockage in the roads. It's like putting up a wall saying messages can't get through, at a certain point, on a certain path. It's in the very protocols of the internet that if that happens, that condition is detected, and it goes to a fallback and says, okay, I can't get through this way. Is there another road by which I can get there? And because the internet is an interconnected network of many different paths, just like the highway system, it generally can do that. So censorship is treated as a kind of a damage, as a kind of damage to the information highway, and the internet's protocols find other ways to get through.
The web as the next stage of capitalism, you're beginning to sound like me now. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the web is the digital version of capitalism, and social media is the next stage in post-industrial capitalism.
And why is it the next stage?
Well, it's the digital version. It's the way in which industrial production and industrial society is being replaced by the digital, by globalization, by the virtualization of production, by all the other features and values and ways of organizing that the web is. So I think that that's what's most interesting about the internet as the next stage in capitalism, as a very pure stage, a reflection of a very pure market capitalism, free market capitalism, hostility towards authority, hostility towards the state, hostility towards external laws and organizations.
So what would you say to all those people, those kind of people sitting there in front of their laptops, their computers, with these kind of dreams of that somehow they're taking part in this great equalizing experiment, that everyone's being connected around the world, it's this great new web family that's being created. What would you say to them?
What would I say to the people who are sitting in front of their computers, believing in revolution? I think I would say the same thing as those people in the 16th and 17th and 18th century who went to church and who believed in universal redemption or realization in heaven. I believe that they are subjects or victims of false consciousness, that they're wrong, that they're believing in something that doesn't really exist, and they're dupes or they're exploited, particularly those of them who stupidly give away their labor for free so that young men in Silicon Valley can become infinitely rich.
So as we could see, free information has become a lot easier because of the web. The web gives us access to different kind of sources. But how do we cope with all these sources, and for what reasons do we want to search information?
Okay, we all have information needs. Those needs might arise from health, it might arise from wanting to find a good school, it might even arise from wanting to find the cheapest product somewhere. Everything triggers off a sort of information need. And to meet your need, you've got to seek information, hence information seeking. Now, in the old days, it wasn't so easy to do that. You could talk to your mother, you could maybe go to the local library, and if you were lucky enough to live next door to the British Library, you were really lucky because they had lots and lots of information and lots of opportunities for information seeking. Now, in today's universe, everybody has the British Library on their doorstep, in their mobile phone, on their laptop, in their office, and suddenly we have unbelievable resources close to hand, and we can seek information in any particular way we like with so many possibilities. In fact, information seeking there's a sort of, it's a siren behavior. We're attracted by seeking information, finding things, and all of those things. So today, information seeking is central to everything in our lives. And unless we can information seek well, we're in real trouble. Paradigm shift comes to mind, but it is absolutely awesome, and it's quite frightening because the scale of the activity, the depth of the activity is just mind-blowing, really. I mean, it's just, for a researcher like myself, it's like finding a massive, massive gold mine. And it's just wonderful, wonderful data that hopefully will change society, that will make sure that in the information-rich world we are in, that people will fully benefit from this fantastic resource. So it's just a wonderful, wonderful sort of harvest. And that's a good way of describing it. And it's happening as I'm sitting here now. More and more people are leaving their footprints, their fingerprints for us to analyze, because things change. And that's the other beauty. We can watch change happen almost in real time. And we're all told our society today is changing fast. Well, look, we don't have to guess. We can just look and see and say it is here, it isn't there. So we can put a lot of things to rest that we couldn't before. There was lots and lots of room for people to have, to put anecdote out there as truth and so on. Now, as I say to many, many people, is unless you've got a bigger data set than me, and most people haven't, then don't bother. Believe what I've got here and carry on. I think I first realized that we were on to something when we started looking at the Times Online. And they gave us their logs because they were very interested in what was actually happening as a result of the digital transition, people moving from the physical world into the virtual world. And they're particularly worried about young people. Not reading newspapers, but in the virtual world, they might view or read. So there were lots and lots of interesting things. And when we got hold of the data, interestingly, the most interesting thing wasn't the thing that they were worried about. The most interesting thing was the biggest group of users for the Times site were robots. Now, 40, 50 years ago, there were no robot information seekers. No robots were using anything. There were no robots. Now we have a world in which robots go looking for information, obviously on behalf of other people. The second thing we noticed is that the majority of viewers who weren't robots didn't come from the UK. Now we know that in a hard copy world, the majority of readers of the Times are in the UK. So the newspaper is written from that perspective. But in the virtual space, the majority of readers are expats. And they don't have the same sort of understanding. They're not living in the UK. Therefore, the paper needs to change what it presents in the virtual space. So little small things, but major things. And you could see it all from the logs. And while people might have suspected that before, is they didn't have any proof. They didn't know. And we could say, well, actually, 30% of the Americans, 20% of them are Australians. The Australians are looking at the sport, the Americans are looking at this, and people could begin to understand what a global audience was, what actually happens when you move a thing to a virtual space. And it changes in ways that you don't quite suspect.